Welcome to One for the Boys podcast, episode 11. If you're watching this on YouTube, then you can see it's our very first virtual podcast. In this episode, we are joined by Ellie Mcgrath. Ellie is a Wellbeing Advisor and has her own podcast called Practice Makes Progress. Ellie is also part of a charity called Calzy Foundation, which is a charity campaigning for a mental health first responder number to be set up, similar to a 999 call, but for somebody in need of urgent mental attention. We'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like and subscribe on YouTube or give us a follow and rating on Spotify. Your support so far has been incredible. We cannot thank you enough. So let's get into it.
I feel like this is the podcast equivalent of eating your dinner off your lap in front of the telly. I don't know why.
Yeah.
So many issues could happen.
100%.
I also feel just like being in a studio is like so prim and proper. And then this is just like, I'm in my kitchen. It's chilling. It's nice.
Yeah. I guess it almost makes it like really formal being in a studio. This is just like, it feels more informal by doing this. I feel like we're in lockdown.
Yeah.
I'm about to do a quiz.
Well, that's the thing, because I started mine in lockdown, so this is all I know really. So when I think Dan even suggested, doing it in person, I was like, it's just like another world to me because I'm so used to things being online. But yeah, it's nice.
Amazing.
What made you start your podcast?
A bit of a whim thing. So I did a year abroad in Melbourne in 2017 to 2018, and it was sort of when I just gotten better at kind of talking more about what I'd been through and struggles and things. And I think I had two roommates, so you're forced to be vulnerable because you're literally sharing your living space with two other people. And I think I felt that slight responsibility of actually, it's not just my space, it's theirs too. So I think kind of, needing to be a bit more vulnerable. And actually, I just found that year, I just was able to connect with so many people, not just from, similar backgrounds to me, but different ages, different walks of life. And I thought, wow, just talking about what you've been through, there's just something really magical about it. So really, it was just, an idea from then, really. And then I think did my final year of uni, came back to Birmingham to do that. And then the idea was just sort of still with me. And then I just thought, I think about February, just before lockdown, I thought, fuck it, why not? So I don't know if I can swear on here, but I thought, why not? And it sort of just went from there, really.
Have you found it useful having like more of the same conversations that you had while you're away?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's so different now. I think I'm just so much better at understanding myself. And actually by talking to other people, I understand myself more, if that makes sense. So I think definitely versed, like compared to back then, I didn't really even know maybe what I'd been through or maybe sort of how I was feeling about certain things. So I think the comparison is really interesting. But yeah, I think that's it's almost, since Melbourne, at least it's 7 years ago, which is kind of terrifying. So I think also just kind of maturing and getting used to, myself. But yeah, I think there's such a power in talking to other people just because you then have an understanding of what they're going through, and it undoubtedly, shapes them as well. So I think I don't know if that answers your question. I feel like I've just started rambling.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's almost like the first pillar of what Matt and I spoke about on our last pod, which was just kind of like, particularly as males, we're so bad at communicating and literally just like communicating full stop, not actually even really about anything. Just like we're so poor at just opening our mouths and like actually talking about anything relevant. And I think, you've almost like nailed that first pillar in the sense of like just having conversations about something. Like Matt and I used to go and work together and we'd end up talking about stuff, and we were like, people should, particularly guys, would probably find this quite useful because I don't think many guys have these conversations. And I think it sounds like you basically that's how what you started doing, really. It's just talking, and then it just kind of like takes on a life of its own, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just becomes really infectious as well. So if people were overhearing you guys and just hearing the fun that you had, whether it be talking about what you have for dinner or something slightly more serious, I think the space to be able to do that range and talk about all those types of things. Because I think the other reason I started the podcast was also to break down, I suppose, that stereotype of mental health and mental illness kind of being all doom and gloom. And then so actually you're so right, just being able to talk about sometimes the mundane, boring, or like the less upsetting things, that's like equally as important. I think so. Yeah, no, it's really essential. And I think 2017 was sort of just before mental health. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but I do feel like before lockdown, it wasn't so much of a priority. People, we weren't telling each other to check in and talk. And so I think definitely the conversations I had around men, especially if with guys as well, you're right. I think it's just those tools. No one really shows you how to talk about it. My parents certainly didn't. I come from Irish Catholic background. It's mental illness is very much kind of taboo. I just wasn't given those skills to talk about what I was going through. So yeah, I think it's definitely becomes an infectious thing, to be able to talk about your friends about whatever you're going through.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like before lockdown, I'll talk about feelings, but nowhere near the extent that I talk now. And lockdown made me realize how mentally unstable I actually was. Like being away from where I was working at the time, being like I was still working there, but at home. So I was like not going in the office as much. I actually wasn't working as much. I was doing my actual hours instead of going to the office early and finishing late. And I realized that really played, because I felt like I had to be in the office getting so much done, and that I could finish at 5 and just have be like, all right, I'm chill now. And then I realized how bad it actually was and how I hadn't been opening up to people about stuff. And then, yeah, when I went self-employed, like Dan said, we just meet up for like coffee, working lunch, whatever. And I was getting more attuned to my emotional side, and we just talk about stuff. And I was just like, wow, okay, actually other people should talk about this more. And then a lot of my friends now are a lot more open to their mental health, or talking about their mental health, because they realized through lockdown how bad they suffered. One of them was on his own in Manchester, didn't live with anybody, didn't see anybody for like almost 3 months, like didn't go to the shop, ordered everything in. So it was like, for him, he's very open with his feelings now, because he realized how much that really played on him. But yeah, a lot of people were in isolation, especially guys through that time, because I feel like girls do have a lot more of a bigger support network, but guys, like, they rely on that, going to the pub and that kind of like human interaction. Listen to the podcast recently, that one you sent me, Dan, that Tin Man, and he's saying how guys almost need like a two-day a week interaction with their mates, like a physical thing, like just to have that kind of like satisfaction to make sure they're okay in a weird like way, even if they don't ask people like if you're okay or what, but like it's just having that social side.
Because I do think females are better at communicating. Like full stop again. But in particular, I do think females are better at getting around each other and supporting each other and sort of like being positive and being vulnerable, I guess. I just think it's a much more natural thing for females to do than it is for males to do. That's the way I see it anyway. That's my perception of it.
100%. Yeah, that's how I see it as well.
Yeah, I would agree.
Sorry. No, you're all good.
No, I would definitely agree. I mean, I've got 3 brothers, no sisters, so I suppose I'm only going off what I've grown up with, and I would say it's the same. I mean, me and my mum, I suppose, are quite good at talking about what we're going through. My dad is terrible. I don't think he would mind me saying that. He's just that kind of typical EastEnder, I've only seen him cry twice type thing. I don't think I've seen my brothers. I mean, maybe my younger brother, because I feel responsible for his upbringing, that he is slightly more in tune with his emotions. But it's interesting what you guys say, because I was always, maybe if you think about lockdown, I was always almost jealous that guys, I suppose, we're talking more generally, have that kind of gamer sort of way of checking in with their friends. So like it would just be like that was a way of connecting and keeping in touch. And I think I've always been kind of jealous that I've never really had that with my friends, so to speak. So I know it's not kind of explicitly talking about your feelings, but there is that kind of easier way just to kind of get together and connect and be together without physically being together, because I think that's what I struggled with. I then went did this for other reasons, but I realized that a lot of what I was doing with my friends during lockdown, like what you were saying, Matt, is I was just drinking way too much, and that was more my social life. And that's when I think I realized that there was something wrong, because then I continued that online. So we would have, like you said before, you know, quizzes or whatnot, and I was living on my own, and I was sitting in my room and just drinking and still getting like blackout drunk, even though I'm like in my room on my own, not living with friends or family. And so I think it's interesting, kind of, again, like those healthier ways of speaking. I think the pub is a great way to connect with people, but I definitely think for me, I realized actually it was more of like an escape thing rather than like a way of checking in. And I think I've only kind of looked to my brothers and now my partner, and I see like how effortlessly they all just message all day, every day, about just like nonsense. And sometimes I do get quite like jealous of that as well. I know it sounds really silly, because I'm like, I kind of want that. I don't know why.
Yeah.
That's so funny, isn't it? The like getting blackout drunk on Zoom during lockdown.
Yeah.
I never did that, but I get it. Like and I know people that were on the beers all the time. I remember talking to my cousins, and they were telling me that they'd just been on like a 4-day drinking session in their garage. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, what is this ridiculousness? Yeah. And I just think, but you're right. It's so funny how, like, Matt and I talk about alcohol all the time.
Yeah.
And we both drink very little. But it's so funny how that, like, the societal norm of going to the pub or just having a drink and socializing with a drink then rolled over into a scenario where no one was even meeting each other, all just at home.
It's like a global pandemic, but the priority is still like, do we have enough booze? That's just not what should be at the forefront of our minds, but it definitely was for me anyway.
Have you slowed down or stopped your intake, and have you felt the impact that that's had on your mental health?
Tenfold. So I mean, so 2020, I think I only did about 6 weeks, but I already felt the benefit from it, because it really was, I was just quite ashamed, and not only ashamed of the drinking, but then ashamed to talk about it. So actually make that step to not was actually the harder thing for me. And I can't really remember. I think that both times it's happened where I've kind of gone, let's say, cold turkey, it's really been like a very overnight thing. I've probably done something to embarrass myself, had a conversation I don't remember having, being informed about it the next morning, and just feeling really low. And so I think, so 2020, I stopped drinking for 6 weeks. And that's when I think the podcast, again, not grew, but just I felt the most into it. You know, it just was on this really nice flow. People were engaging with it, and I also just felt like, yes, I was a better version of myself. Had I continued binge drinking, the podcast wouldn't have been as good as it was. Or I just wouldn't have put as much effort into making content, because I would have been too busy being hungover or out drinking. And then I sort of got back into like a fair enough groove. But growing up, my family drank a lot. They still drink a lot. My parents drink because they like the taste of alcohol. They drink because it's a fun thing to do. And so I genuinely grew up thinking that drinking a lot was just quite normal. It wasn't. And then obviously you go to uni in the UK, that just continues, if not exacerbates. So also being at home then with them to try and like stop my drinking was quite hard, because then I was like, well, what do we have in common now? It used to be this kind of routine, especially during lockdown. It was just every day we getting drunk, and then it was like I wasn't joining in on that. And so I felt better in myself, but I felt like the bonds I kind of had with people felt less strong, because what we had in common was getting drunk together. I know that's a really sad feeling, but that's definitely what it felt in that moment.
I completely agree. Sorry, my possibly having Irish parents is something to do with it, but like my dad drinks for Ireland, and growing up as a teenager, like having a beer with him was a big thing. It was just like a thing we did. We'd go to the pub, we'd have a few beers at home together, and then when I stopped drinking, I think it really confused him. He didn't get it, and he also he thought that I was just pretending. And so then, like, he's never accepted the fact that I don't drink. He doesn't have a problem with it, but he just doesn't. He's never like, never offers me something else. It's always like straight in. I'm like, no, like I probably haven't drank casually for like 3 years, Dad. So I'm all right. I can't help myself but like bite back at him. But it's so interesting how, I completely agree. It's like I can see myself 4 or 5 years ago with a smile on my face, having a beer with him, not really talking about anything, but just like chilled and like happy, and then take that beer away and I'm kind of like, I don't know where's the connection? Because our conversations were so nothing. I'm not interested when I'm sober. So it's kind of like, it's difficult, but I completely understand what you mean.
Yeah, it's a weird one, right? You're talking about your family and your friends, but for some reason that's what made it so good. We kind of refer like as siblings to like the McGrath Friday nights. It would be like we all get in from whatever it was, work, school, whatever, and those would be like such fun times. And it would, even the thought of doing that without a drink. I mean, I've done it a few times, but my mum's exactly the same. She'll, even if I say no as soon as I get in the door, because it really is as soon as I get in the door, an hour later she'll be like, you sure I can't tempt you? And it's like, it is difficult when people kind of don't get that, I suppose, that understanding. And I think that's what I've enjoyed, maybe the attempts I've made kind of in the last couple of years, because there's so many more of my friends now are kind of on the same level. My partner and I, we don't drink at home. Again, we don't casually drink. We might go out every now and again with like friends and stuff, but having that understanding. But this is so stupid, because when I was younger, maybe about 16, 17, I remember saying to my best friend, I was like, I could never be with someone who drinks, like how boring. And now I am that person. And it is a big part of friendships. And I think you just have to find those people that get you and understand why you're doing it, because they're probably doing it themselves as well. But yeah, I can totally empathize with that kind of the bond not being different, and that's really bad, but that's how it feels, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because we spoke about it when we had a couple of guests on the podcast, Cal and Nick, and Nick was saying he's got a mate that does the same as like one of my friends. They've got the kind of similar traits where it's like they want you to get on a certain level of like pissed, because that's when they feel like that you're going to have the best time, is when you're on that level with them. But it's like, well, no, I'm with you at the pub or whatever because I like you. You're like a best friend. But there's always that one person that we have in common that's like that. It's like, okay, well, that Matt's not having a good time until he's on that level. And my friends drink quite a lot, and again, they're very like, one's Irish Scottish, so his family are just very like heavy with the drink. He's always just, as soon as he finishes Friday night, it's like straight around my other mate's house and they have a few beers, and I'm like, I don't drink that much. I'll go like maybe 2-3 months without any alcohol, like at all. I don't drink at home, and if I do go out, I usually drive. I have to drive because no one lives near me, so like I'll go to the pub and just have a Coke or something. And then they're starting to realize now that I don't drink that much. So it's like, if we're going for a night out or whatever, they're not going to be like, right, Matt has to be on this level. They're just, he's obviously having a good time as he is. But yeah, first they didn't really understand, and it was like almost like that, not that bond wasn't there, but they just didn't get it. And now they're starting to understand, so they're kind of more accepting of it. But yeah, you can definitely have like you say at uni, like the people that you would spend time with are actually just people that you'd meet on a night out. You'd only ever see them on a night out, and you'd have this like great relationship. And then you see him around uni, like around campus, being like, hey, you're right, yeah, good, yeah, thanks, cool, see you later. And then you see him like 9 hours later in the SU, and you're like best friends.
Yeah.
Just over, having 9 VKs later, and it's it's interesting, really interesting.
This is the bit that I find really conflicting, because like I hate how I feel when I've had a beer, but I love a beer. I love it. So it's like, it's really, really like it's taken so much discipline to not do that, knowing the long-term gain I get from it. I don't get anxiety, I don't get beer fear, I don't ruin 3 days of my week trying to sort of control my thoughts and stuff. But at the same time, I absolutely love a social, and I love having a beer. It's really hard, isn't it, finding that, like you said, 9 VKs deep at student union, like, oh, what a day. But that just doesn't, it's the long term of that doesn't do me any favors. It's not what I want anymore, but it's still such a hard, it's a hard thing to come to terms with. I think I was saying to you the other week, Matt, that I I decided to have a beer with my Sunday lunch the other day, and I felt like
Yeah.
a fraud because I'm someone that is
Yeah.
like, I don't drink casually. I'm either
Yeah.
it's like 4 occasions
Yeah.
a year we go out and we absolutely send it, and then nothing in between. But I was like, I felt guilty for having it. I was like, Jesus Christ, mate, chill yourself out. Like, it's just a beer. It's fine. Calm down.
Yes.
But now I've almost feel like I've created a rod for my own back. And same with you, Matt, Matt said at the weekend that he was going to go completely sober.
Yeah.
And we sort of discussed it, and I was like, do you need that pressure really to do that? We're going off on a bit of a tangent here.
No, that's cool. But yeah, like I was literally about to say, like when I said to you, I was like, right, I'm thinking of going teetotal, but I want you to question my reasoning because and then we came to the solution of not putting pressure on it, being like, well, if I want a drink, I can have one, and I don't feel guilty then if I do have one. But I love rum. Like dark rum is like the best. So I'm like, I know if someone was like, oh, I've got a really nice dark rum, I'd be like, oh, okay. Like I wouldn't be able to say no. Because I actually do like having it, but having the one's cool, but not having a whole bottle and like ending up like, somewhere at 3 a.m. being like, what am I doing in my life?
Do
you, Ellie, do you find that conflict at home? Have you found that conflict at home where your family might be offering it to you, but you're actually like, I really love Friday night at McGrath's, but I don't want to feel like shit tomorrow?
It honestly, it's so bad. And I'll even, I mean, this is just me anyway, kind of overthinking, but like, if I know I'm going around to see them. So for example, 2 of my brothers have been away. One of them gets back on Tuesday, and I'm already thinking like, okay, so it's like a Tuesday, but then I do have this the next day. So I'm already thinking, I know I'll be offered one, and I need to think it through about my answer. And I'm having this whole dialogue in my head. I'm playing out my mum offering it to me, and me building up the courage to either say no and give a really stern reason as to why, or say yes. And the other thing I do is then just feel anxious, like you were saying, Dan, like having a beer with your Sunday lunch is almost, you just feel really, I feel overwhelmed for some reason, even though there's absolutely nothing wrong like with saying yes and having one. I think that was and still is probably my issue, is just learning when, even if I get to a nice level, stay at that level, switch to a soft drink, switch to water. I definitely just love the feeling. And so sometimes it's knowing when you just don't need to keep it going. But I definitely, overthink it, being at home and like you say, just wanting to have fun. But I realize like there are people that can do that and just don't deep it the next day. They don't have this 3 days out of their week, I get very kind of like anxiety, feeling very anxious. I really want to take care of myself, go for a run. So when I can't run, then I feel like I'm letting myself down. It just becomes this whole thing. And I just end up with, was the night out really worth all of these things that you're now punishing yourself for the next day? 9 times out of 10, it's never worth it. I mean, I would say it's never worth it, really. But so I don't know. It's a really tough one, and I think particularly this time of year. I know that's a really lame excuse, but that's what people are going to start getting excited by. I'm on TikTok
Big
and
garden
seeing
season.
best beer gardens in London, where to head. I mean, me and my boyfriend went out last weekend. We found a really nice pub garden near us, both just got a soft drink. And to be honest, sometimes when you're sober sitting in a pub, when you see people starting to get like a bit, like a bit messy, a bit sloppy, I do feel like a tiny bit smug. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to be like that. I'm quite happy I made my decision. But I'm definitely still in that place of like convincing myself, which I know isn't great, but it's a journey, I guess.
That's really funny that you just said that, because I was just thinking about it when you said if you're to decline a drink when you're with your family, you'll have to give a stern reason as to why not. And that is you again, like convincing yourself, isn't it? Because like, why can't you just say no and that'd be fine?
I don't know. I mean, I remember my mum's birthday's always in January, bless her. So a lot of people do dry January, and we did this year. And so we get to the restaurant and she's like, are you sure? Like, are you really sure? And we're both like, yeah, mum, honestly, like we're not doing it. And anyway, the cocktails come over and Dan and I are sitting at this end of the table, and she's just like, bring those over here. They're the teetotalers down the other end. So even though they're sort of like, I know they are a joke, but I feel like she's actually a bit annoyed that we weren't drinking for her birthday. And so you do get these like little digs. So I think that might be why I like plan my answer, because I feel like they want me to join in. But again, some people just don't feel that bad after, like the day after, which I'm kind of jealous of. If I never,
Weirdos.
do you know what I mean? Like if I could just get up and go again, or get on with my day, then I would not be overthinking it at all. But it's because I know I can't. I know I'm going to feel horrific, basically.
I wonder whether that is kind of like a quantity thing in terms of, well, I used to run a bar. When I used to run a bar, well, I don't know why it does that. When I used to run a bar, we used to drink like 5-6 times a week, and I would just crack on the next day as if nothing had happened. Like I would work 9 a.m. till 2 a.m, get drunk, and then go out, and then wake up at 6 to go for a run with my cousin, and then go back to work at 9, just like it was nothing. And I look back on that and I'm like, there's absolutely, I couldn't do the 9 a.m. till 2 a.m. bit now, let alone drink and go out. So but I think it's to do with, because I'll only now drink 3-4 times a year, it's so much more potent in my system.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was almost like the water was foggy anyway. So it's like, it's whatever, isn't it? So I wonder whether that's something to do with it.
Yeah, well, not that he's a scientist, but we went to see some comedy recently, and Joe Lycett was there, and he did say that apparently there's something in, like, your liver does produce an enzyme to break down alcohol, and if you kind of go for ages without it and then kind of put it back in your system, I think that's why you end up feeling so much worse, because you haven't got that kind of enzyme ready to go, so your body's just like totally destroyed by it. But so it's interesting, but
yeah, no, that makes sense. We've got a couple of bits. Sorry, Matt, you look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, no, carry on. That's what I was going to say.
I was just going to say, we had a couple of bits that we wanted sort of you to take the lead on, and it's just stuff about you, so it's nothing.
Yeah.
It's nothing. We're not testing you on anything. But yeah, we just wanted to sort of understand your journey. I had a look at the blog that you've got on through your link tree from your Instagram, which mentions sort of disordered eating from an experience at school. I just wondered whether you'd be happy to sort of take us through that journey and like what led you to basically here now. So
yeah, sure. Should I go now?
Yeah,
Buckle in. Okay. Yeah, so I'm very good at speaking about it now. I definitely wasn't when I was younger. But essentially, I suppose it all began when I was around 14 and I just wasn't looking after myself very well. I lived very close to my school and I would just sort of snack after school. Just didn't think anything of it. I sort of, living in kind of ignorant bliss. And then, it was just one day at PE, we were in the changing rooms, or we were playing PE, I can't remember. And basically this one girl said to me that the back of my legs were bleeding. I thought, very bizarre. How have I gotten that injury for just playing netball? And then basically they were stretch marks, and they were obviously really red and really visible for her, to see them and comment on them. Not great to comment on them, but this was like 2009. So way before, we sort of encouraged body positivity and things like that. But I basically went home to my mum and I showed them to her. And then my mum, sadly, both my parents are sort of known to take part in fad diets. And again, this is like 2009. So people could fall for those a lot more easily. And basically she was like, right, you'll join me, we're going to do this fad diet together. I don't know, if you guys are aware or when people listen to this. So this was the Dukan diet. So it's basically just protein. Even like fruit and veg isn't really introduced until like a few days in. The idea is that you just cut through any of the fat that you had. So me being, I want to say 13 or 14, so like super, super young. I remember coming downstairs one day and my mum was just like, this is your dinner. And it was just like a plate of prawns. I was just like, what? So used to just munching whatever I wanted to and not caring. And so that was a really big shock. But basically, the diet worked, I guess. And I lost a lot of weight very quickly. And I don't know what that did to my psyche, whether it was I felt better about myself, I was getting compliments, and because probably deep down I was a very insecure person, definitely still am. You know, those comments meant a lot to me, and I don't know what changed, whether it was there before. But yeah, it was like, right, this is my new mission. This is almost like what I'm here to do. The goal is just to be as slim as possible. And so it happened really quite quickly, which is, you know, really quite upsetting. Me and my mum have, you know, spoken about it since, and obviously there's regrets there about that advice, but, you know, hold nothing against her. But yeah, so that I became very unwell. I think within 6 months, I probably lost 2 or 3 stone. Like, it was like incredibly quick, and sadly I became so underweight that then actually my periods had stopped. And I was kind of sort of growing hairs on my back. So obviously your body trying to do anything it can to, you know, keep itself warm, because I was so undernourishing it. And thankfully it was actually a really lovely PE teacher who was also my form teacher, and I think had just sort of noticed really quite how bad it had become. So she reached out to my mum, and then I think that's when my mum sort of felt really sad and realized sort of what was going on, because no one was really talking about it. We still don't really talk about it as a family. I think it is quite a uncomfortable subject for my parents. I mean, my brothers were way too young to, you know what was going on. But yeah, so that was sort of 2020, maybe 2010 to maybe 2011, maybe 2012 was when it was at its worst. Yeah, just very, very small, and became quite scared of food. So where the diet had sort of, you know, banned carbohydrates, you know, all the things that you need for energy, which I know now. I didn't know that back then. So I just really became quite fearful of things, you know, which just took my recovery a lot longer. I don't really know how I got better. I really think it was just one day. I think my friends, you know, one of my closest friends, she was incredibly important to me at the time. I think she just made food something that was really social and fun, and something that I wanted to do again. And so I would say that sort of helped me looked a bit physically better. But I suppose again at this time, so that kind of drive to be, you know, as slim as possible, it sort of extended into, I would say, all of my life. So grades, boys, I don't know, just it was almost like I was just measuring myself against absolutely everything. You know, I wouldn't be happy with 99%. I was just hard on myself for just every single aspect of my life, which is really quite exhausting. You know, days weren't very fun, just living inside my head. And then I took that mentality to uni, and I didn't tell anyone. I remember one of the first nights at uni, I was speaking to a friend, and we sort of were talking about who we'd known that had come to this uni. I mean, I knew very few people, but she said one girl, and she went, "Oh, but she's anorexic." And I think that kind of judgment, again, there's nothing on the person, but there was no way that I was then going to say, "Oh, actually, that's something that I struggle with / still do." So I just didn't say anything, because I just thought I didn't want anyone to judge me, because that poor girl, you know, people would talk about her. And so I just thought I really didn't want that for myself. So yeah, I just didn't tell anyone what was going on. And so I kind of just kept it to myself. You know, I was self-catered, so I could really do my own meals. So they still weren't very, you know, balanced. And then began, you know, binge drinking, and it was really quite, really quite bad. It sort of really went under, I don't know, looked after, I guess, for most of university. And then I got the chance to go to Melbourne. So that was 2 years in. But yeah, those 2 years of uni were just really unhealthy habits, you know, not just drinking, you know, other things. Because I think it was just an escape. It was just quite fun to get drunk, talk about something else, not be inside my own head. But then the kind of mental side of it got quite bad in terms of academic work. I fell really behind. I think I became quite depressed, I think, in my second year. That kind of mindset of, you know, you need to be the best in the room is not a mindset you should have ever, really, but especially at uni when you're there to learn. I think I was doing this like dense philosophy from the fucking 1700s. Like, I didn't write it, I was gonna have to learn it, but in my head that like wasn't enough. I needed to know. everything. And so basically, rather than you know, facing it, I just avoided it, because I didn't like being in situations that made me feel not good about myself or made me face something that I was terrified of facing. It was just so much easier to run away. So that's basically what I did. And then I think I stopped going to lectures. I think I got so many of those emails, you know, where are you? We haven't seen you. You know, housemates would come and check on me. I'd be playing sad songs during the day with my lights off in the room, you know, really kind of like a depression pit, I want to say. And then I don't really know, again, what happened. I think it was a housemate that just sort of had noticed, you know, how little I was eating, and I'd stopped going to class. But again, we were all super young, so it wasn't anything that anyone really knew anything about. But yeah, I think I told my parents eventually, and my mum, you know, she was really lovely over the phone. And then I got all my kind of exams deferred, and I sort of had 6 months to really get my stuff together. And then I really just did that, you know, January 2017, I was just like, I've just got to get this done. It again was like a very overnight thing. I don't really think it was any one thing that changed, that I was, you know, I sort of saw a point in living again. I think I really don't know. I really don't know, but I'm obviously very grateful that, you know, I had that change in mindset. But yeah, I started counseling, and that counseling session honestly was horrific. Anyone who has been to counseling will know that they are not talking, it is there for you. And so that first session, I just sort of sat there, and she wasn't going to say anything, and I think this awkward silence just killed me. So I just started rambling, and actually I really found the use in talking. And so I think I then took that newish me to Melbourne, and then I thought, you know what, no one knows you, you don't have to tell them anything, but you know, maybe this is your kind of time to reinvent yourself a little bit. And again, having 2 roommates, like I said before, you have to be vulnerable, because it's not just your space, it's theirs. And so it's not fair to just be in a mood and not explain it. You do have to kind of look at yourself inward, you know, be a bit more introspective. And what I had were 2 lifelong friends, you know, that just created a really safe space for us to all talk about, you know, what we'd been through, and some of them had experienced some of the things that I'd gone through. And it was the first time I'd really actually said anorexia or eating disorder out loud. So that was, you know, a good 5 or 6 years later. So that was a huge moment for me, and they didn't treat me any differently. If anything, it was just like, great, cool. So, you know, what we're doing next, you know, there was no judgment. And so again, I think just getting to that point, I think people, you know, being really understanding has really helped me. And then, yeah, that year was, you know, an interesting year. You're living abroad. It was, you know, definitely one for the, memory books. But yeah, I think just meeting lots of people from across the world, who were just so open and so vulnerable, I just found that really infectious. And I loved hearing about other people's stories, and you know, they don't see you any differently, why would you see them any differently? And it just became this really kind of positive space. So yeah, I took that back with me to my final year. And then I think because I'd sort of become more conscious of these issues, I basically wrote my dissertation about kind of how Instagram was sort of worsening women's body issues. And so I remember doing this kind of form, posting it on Facebook. I think within a day or two, like 600 people have filled it out. And I think I just thought, like, wow, this is such a topic that we're all dealing with, but nobody's talking about. Because I suppose Instagram, I sort of grew up with it. So it definitely then became a thing, you know. You compare pictures, you compare likes were the, you know, the biggest currency going. It was such an easy way to compare yourself. And so, yeah, kind of doing that project, I found really healing. You know, for myself, I did a focus group, and we really kind of got to depths. And, you know, some of these girls were saying in their first year, they were influenced to buy these diet pills, which basically just, you know, gave them the shits for about 4 days, and we just kind of exchanged, I guess, unhealthy kind of coping mechanisms. And it was just a really kind of amazing space for us all to finally talk about what we've basically all been dealing with privately. And I think just that feeling, it was the first time I really felt like I had purpose in my life, which I know at 22 isn't, you know, the worst thing. It's not like you're at the end of the road, but I think yeah, I was really excited with with what I had done and what I'd been able to create. And I think I just wanted to keep that going. And then I found my master's, was in public mental health. So just learning about kind of mental health across the globe and things like that. And I mean, I've had loads of different jobs since, but I'm now have been working in education for the last 3 years. Supporting students with their mental health, and I suppose creating that safe space for them to talk about what they're going through, because that was something that was so key for me, I guess, in my recovery. And in 2020 I started my podcast, and I just wanted it to be a space where, again, people talked about what they were going through. I kept it private at first because I was a bit embarrassed about what people from school would think of me, but you just learn to let that go because it's hopefully for a bigger purpose. And actually most people tend to be really nice, and if they're being horrible, you just don't need to worry about them anyway. But that's sort of what's led me to this point. But yeah, that was probably quite long. I'm really sorry if I rambled too much, but I hope that gave a nice gist.
Yeah, no, it was
Matt,
really good.
I feel like Matt's gonna have loads of questions, especially about the end bit.
I've got so many questions.
Go for it.
The first off is like I struggled as I was a kid with my weight. Like my parents were always like, right, Saturday night takeaway, let's get one. I was active as a kid. I'd skate with my like friends and cousins and stuff, so I was always doing things. But just when I was like younger, at primary school, I felt like I was always like picked last to play football or a sport or something that was like a mainstream sport, really. And I felt like that was because of my weight. I was a little bit bigger as a kid, so I've always had like a unhealthy relationship with food when I was growing up, in terms of like, I was like, I'd eat because I'd be like, I'm unhappy, and I'm happy because I eat. That real cliche thing of like, so I was a bit bigger. When I went to uni, like through that school, I was up and down with my weight, but it was mainly on like the bigger side. Then I went to uni in my first year. I had 4 years, like I was quite big, and then I found like the best Chinese near my house, so that's the reason why. It was just super cheap, and I was like, this is great. And then it got home for the summer, and I was like, something needs to change. I lost like 3 stone over the summer period, like very unhealthy weight loss. But then when I went back to uni, it was like people that I hadn't spoken to that were like part of our friendship circle then decided to like talk to me. And I was like, no, thank you. Like, you didn't talk to me as when I was bigger, so I don't want to talk to you now. And I just had that like real unhealthy, it was just a really weird relationship. So like now I still see myself sometimes how I was then.
Yeah.
Like, so if I don't go to the gym or I don't go for a walk and then have like food in the evening, I think, fucking hell, I'm going to be like 10 stone heavier tomorrow morning. Like, or if I have like a takeaway, I'm going to be like, oh my God, I can't eat anything for like 2 days. So I have that body dysmorphia. Like, I like to wear things XL, and my wife is always like, you can fit in a large easily and it will look nice on you. But I'm like, yeah, but it has to be XL. I like the style, which is great, but it's also because I feel self-conscious. But so yeah, that's really interesting how like you've obviously had people that like pick up on it and like want to help you, but it's kind of like now body dysmorphia for guys is to the same level as women, plus it's getting a bit worse. It's kind of like a tipping point. So it's really good for you to kind of share your story, because I feel like a lot of people that listen to the podcast will hopefully like understand that as well, because there's other people that I know are kind of like going through a bit of a weight loss program, like people we meet up with who do runs and stuff. So really interesting when you mentioned that, because it's definitely going to help a lot of people. But male body dysmorphia at the moment it's not just weight, it's like hairline, like hair loss. And then going into what you said at the end about social media, like I grew up with Instagram because I'm 34 and I'm 35 this year, so it was like I was there from the beginning. Like, and that whole currency of likes and the pressures of social media now for guys to have like insane abs, like to have like 0.001% body fat. It's like we spoke about it on the podcast before, me and Dan, about like what should a guy be like? Should they be like chiseled like a Greek god that takes 10 to 15 years of pure discipline to be that way, but that's what social media is telling us to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's really difficult to try and
There's
navigate.
the perception that that's how you should look after like 2 weeks of training, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's the big problem with it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's and it's the same for girls. Like you wouldn't believe the amount of girls you see on Instagram that are on steroids that are just flaunting it as if they just go to the gym and they eat healthy and that's all you need to do. Like don't worry about me and the gear that I take off camera.
Yeah.
And like that, but that's the I think the biggest issue is I can't remember. There's a crazy stat of like basically you never would see like a really, really in shape person unless you saw someone in a magazine, or like maybe one time on holiday you'd see someone that was like in insane shape.
Yeah.
So like there's one person, whereas now you could follow, if you only followed, I think it's like the top 0.01% of physiques in the world, you'd still be following like 6,000 people who are in like the most absurd shape ever. And so then all you see is like, as Matt said, chiseled abs, massive shoulders, big bum. Like it's just never ending. But there's 6,000 people there, and you're like, God, this is so normal to look like that. And then all of a sudden, like from both genders.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say both genders? I've fucking said it now. Both genders. Both genders. We have problems because everyone's just like, oh, that's how that. Girls are like, that's how I should look, and lads are like, that's how I should look.
Yeah,
but it's just not. It's not what it should be.
No, one, it's unsustainable, but two, it's ever changing. It's so, I feel like there are just trends, and so you can end up kind of committing to looking a certain way, and then the next week it will be something totally different that's in fashion, and then you've almost got to like rethink everything. And I think that's why it really used to affect me, because I would buy clothes, so many clothes, like I don't know. I think my insecurities definitely come at a financial cost, just because I've always just worried about, what I should be wearing and just looking great all the time. And Matt, I definitely relate to what you were saying about, wearing baggier clothes. I would be that person still wearing a puffer jacket, in like July, August, because I was just so terrified of, I guess, showing my real self. And I think it's still going to take some work. And I think if you still carry that kind of childhood trauma, it's quite hard to unlearn it and not see yourself as that younger person. I kind of do always kind of see her in there, and I have the exact same thoughts as you. I kind of panic. I'm getting a lot better, but particularly things like holidays, you are just a bit more carefree. I actually almost panic more about how I'm going to feel. Am I going to feel sluggish? And then it's about kind of punishing myself, those few days after, to almost, make back what I've lost. You know what I mean? That just that really kind of backwards thinking. But I think, social media just made it very difficult. I totally went through a phase of just wearing like false eyelashes. I never used to wear my natural curls because I hated them. I just wanted to look like everybody else. And I think it just takes time to really just accept yourself for who you are and kind of stop that comparison. So I do use my personal Instagram account way less than I used to. I've also deleted really old posts that I know I only posted to get likes, because I just knew what I was going through in that moment. And so that's why I think I also love the podcast and the people I've met through, the page, is just because they're out there kind of posting much more relatable content. And so you don't feel like shit if you're going to be on your phone, because you're actually going to see something that's really uplifting or really inspirational. Or even if you do feel low and someone's going, it's okay, you can start again. And I've been here before. You're like, okay, I can start again, rather than feeling low, going online, seeing some sort of perfect celebrity and just being like, well, I may as well just give up now because I'm never going to get there. And it's like, that should never be the end goal anyway. But so it definitely takes some time to unlearn those things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I'm still I'm still learning a lot of, like, especially with the body thing. Before I went to the Philippines to get married, I was like trying some swim trunks, and I was like, great, they're like super baggy, you need to get some more, that's awesome. But still self-conscious, being like, oh, but I feel like nervous wearing them. in like it's just how I am. It's just something I'm still going to have to work on. But yeah, kind of the back end of your journey where you said about like the now going into like mental health. So I did graphic design at uni, and I've said on the podcast before, I'd never really thought about anything mental health psychology wise until I started knowing about my own feelings, and then almost about really the podcast and my going self-employed, being like how mentally resilient you have to be to get shit done, basically. And yeah, like, so with, you say like you did your masters, like then how was your connection going into the kind of like the Calzy Foundation? That'd be really interesting to kind of go into that, because our last episode was actually about male suicide. So we explained on there that whilst I was at uni, one of my friends died by suicide in 2010, I think it was. Yeah, so I'm really interested to what Calzy do and your involvement with them. Did the mental health, did the masters kind of like lead into going into that?
No, it was really just because I went to school with Cal, and so first of all, when he went missing, that really just upset me, and so we're talking kind of January 2021, and so yeah, I think that just it really threw me, and it's not the kind of the first death that we'd sort of had in our school year or sort of the surrounding year. And so when his parents, kind of posted that they were, creating a foundation and just would anyone be interested, I think, I've been doing the podcast for a bit and I just felt really kind of, I guess, compelled, to say that this is what I've been doing and I just really want to help in any way that I can. So yeah, the Calzy Foundation. So his name was Cal. And so his parents set up the foundation kind of threefold. It was really to kind of start a peer kind of movement, I guess, a peer-to-peer support. I think because, again, as I already said, it wasn't the first death, that we'd had kind of from our school year. And I think, I've had a couple of people from my school year on the podcast as well. And I think we just felt like we were just lacking, that kind of infrastructure to talk to each other and admit what we were going through. And so that was kind of the main kind of principle when Calzy, set itself up. It was just really to kind of hold a space for other young people to, to come together and be honest about what they were going through. And particularly, when you do sometimes when you lose a close friend to suicide, it can also kind of increase your your own likeliness to either have those thoughts or to make plans. And so it was also really just about kind of containing the people affected by his death, and really kind of looking after each other. It's been 3 years, and so it's sort of grown amazingly. We now kind of help to deliver mental health first aid training, which is amazing. We also got invited to Parliament back in October, actually coincidentally on World Mental Health Day. And so it's just really about I suppose we call ourselves his tribe, and that's what Cal was amazing at talking to other people. He would mainly work in hospitality. He would just start chatting to people at a pub. Again, it's just that element of conversation and why that's so important. And we do it because one conversation could potentially save lives. So yeah, his parents are incredible people and his sister's on the foundation too. But yeah, so working with Calzy at the moment, it's just about getting more people involved. I ran the half marathon for them last year just to raise some money, but they really are an amazing foundation. And yeah, I suppose their aims is to the other thing they're working on is creating a new emergency mental health number. So they're kind of being that 999 for when you're in an emergency, but people kind of know less what to do when they're in a mental health emergency. And yes, there are, the Samaritans and Shout and things like that, but I think it's, wanting a more of like a mental health A&E. So that's the other kind of big thing that they're working on. But yeah, so they're incredible, and it's a privilege to be working with them.
Yeah, that's awesome, especially with that, the kind of like the hotline that's not just, I know, yeah, you can ring Samaritans if you're feeling, but people might also be like, oh, I don't want to talk to Samaritans because they might feel like the pressure of like, oh, they're going to like talk to me a certain way. They're going to be like, but if there's like a number, like almost like an emergency number, like a 111 or a 999, people might be like, oh, okay, well, they might not feel as it's like a formal, I've got to tell them how I feel. It could just be, what's going on. They could just come and save you. Like someone could be like, I'm on a bridge, don't know what to do, and ring the number, and you know, it goes through to whoever. So I think that's incredible. Like I think me and Dan spoke about that before. Like there's nothing out there like that already for the kind of mental health. Because usually like who do you turn to? Like especially guys, like they just don't know what, you know, we don't know what Bob was going through at that time. I've had friends at the moment that are going through difficult times, and it's like they're getting better at talking, so that, you know, they know they can call us. But yeah, again, like you said, like I've had 12 people, I think it is, from my school year die by suicide. So it's like, and I know those guys from school would have never spoken about their feelings. Even now, they would have been the type of people that wouldn't have ever done it. But if there was maybe a number in the back of their mind, they could have rang potentially. So the emergency numbers, incredible. And I think it'd be really cool to know more about that off here. That I would, with the mental health side of things, like to do with my business. So I'll have to message you about that separately.
It's it just needs to be way more accessible, doesn't it? If you think of like the NHS 909 111, like they're not trained to deal with people going through like a mental health crisis. And you know, if you go through the NHS for any form of counselling, like what you're looking at a year, aren't you? Like if you've got a problem today, that's not particularly useful. And it's that like quick accessibility to be able to talk to someone. And unless you've got money, even if you've got money, you're going to be waiting a day or two. But people that don't have the resources to pay for things and also need the help immediately, like there's just absolutely nothing apart from the hope that you've got someone close to you that you feel close enough to that you can open up with. And there is literally there's zero help otherwise in that like first instance. So I think a number where you could call where you wouldn't have to wait months to actually talk to someone would be super useful. I'm already trying to think from like a practical perspective of like how difficult it would be to fulfill that. Just from like handling calls, having the right people on the end of the phone, like that's going to be a hell of a challenge in its own right, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what they've realized, I mean, obviously that's why, you know, you do, you know, it's about having the idea, and then it's about talking to the people who, like you say, can actually make it happen, and also understand what are the barriers. Okay, so what do we need to think about? And you know, that's, you know, end up going to Parliament and having people actually kind of lobby for, you know, what we want to do. Has also been really key. But, you know, for example, even some of the numbers that you call, the ones existing ones, you know, you'll get an automated message going, you know, choose from the options below, and you're thinking, it's not really why, you know, I'm here. I'm sort of, I need someone, you know, right now. And so that's why it is amazing what they're doing. And it's definitely the beginning, I think, of something that's going to be, you know, that I really think could save lives. But, you know, we know that it is the biggest, you know, killer of men, suicide. You know, for men, I think it's under 50 now. You know, my two cousins, they both attend Leeds University. They told me a really heartbreaking story, that they had planned as housemates to go to some races the next day. You know, one of their housemates, they were literally all chatting about, you know, what they're going to wear the next day. Next morning, they're all kind of waiting for this one guy. They just assume that he's taking too long to get ready, you know, and they found him in their room, and he died by suicide. And you just think, you know, he showed no signs, I guess. And I think that's the other thing. It's a really difficult one to accept for people, because you want to know that there was that moment or that thing that they said where it hinted to you that that's why it might be what they're contemplating. But in the cases where you really kind of get no sense of that, it can feel really difficult to you know, to accept what's happened and to try and start living life without them, because you just want to know that there was something that you'd missed. And I think it's amazing having the emergency number for people that are going through it, but I think it's also just about, you know, going right back to when people are kind of, you know, growing up, and it is just about that education and in talking about things, and you know, kind of building that support network, you know, far earlier on.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, go.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously, we had one of Dan's mates on, Harry, and he works in a social, emotional, mental health unit in a school.
Oh yeah.
So he's talking about, obviously they reintegrate kids back in, like, who have got trauma back into kind of mainstream school curriculum, and basically making them aware of their emotions. They might behave a certain way because of their emotions. They might have some sort of trauma, so they're either really angry, but there's a reason why they're acting angry. Like when I was at school and when they're acting angry, people were just like, oh, just send them out for detention. Like that was going to fix everything. Great, just put them in a room for 3 hours. But now it's like there's more education around it. So obviously what you like with the Calzy, do like the peer-to-peer thing, is that something that kind of starts off quite early on in school? Because I think education, like in school, being able to get kids to be more emotionally available and understanding their emotions from an earlier age is going to help so much more in like 10-20 years time.
100%. I mean, their focus is young people, only because I suppose they're thinking about, Cal and sort of and his peers, but they are working with someone who is doing a very similar thing in primary schools. So I don't know if they're connected with anyone kind of doing it for secondary schools yet, but yeah, I know that they are kind of establishing connections, I guess, with primary schools. But it's so important. But I have a friend who teaches PSHE, which I guess was it was called citizenship when I went to school. Yeah. But it's really interesting because she tries to talk about these issues, and not just these issues, things like consent, kind of revenge porn, all those kind of big things that we just had to learn later on in life, and perhaps for some of us it was you're learning because it was too late and you may have been a victim of some of these things, and it's the backlash that she gets from the parents, which I find really interesting. And so I would be intrigued to see sometimes whether it's about kind of teaching these issues. I don't know, parents I think just have this fear that if their kid learns about it, they're going to be more at risk. So it's a really interesting debate in trying to kind of just like put it out into the curriculum and say that these are really important things to talk about, because sometimes it's the parents that get quite concerned about that content, which I find insane, but I know that's because I'm in this space and I know it would be helpful. But I have another friend who said that I think there's been 2 or 3 boys in year 11 alone that have died by suicide in the last year. And I think the school is the first thing that, parents, press and things kind of look to, is to be like, how could this happen? Why did this happen? Things like that. So I can imagine secondary school is just such a kind of minefield of trying to get everything right. But it would be so interesting because it definitely is needed.
Yeah, you're at that age where you're like, so like everything you do is like being scrutinized by your mates and your friends, and you're like,
awful.
Yeah, it's terrible. Go on, Dan.
No, I actually I wrote a note earlier about when Ellie, when you had the comments made to you in PE, I made a note of like, kids are fucking horrible sometimes, but it's not necessarily intentional. Like they they say shit, don't they? On a different note, I think and I think this is what we spoke about once we'd spoken to Harry, this thing of like, the parents are concerned, but actually if they'd have gone through some kind of education at school, and like what Harry's doing now is teaching kids about their emotions from like the earliest stage. Like imagine being 5 years old and starting to learn about this. By the time you're 18, you're on like a completely different planet to a normal 18-year-old. And I think it's the same, like with the parents have concerns about it, but if parents had gone through and learn to understand sort of like their emotions, learn the array of different things sort of around that subject, they would then understand why it's so important for the kids to go through the same process. But I think there has to be almost like a whole generational cycle of people that go through it before we then are like, oh, okay, this is why we do that. That makes complete sense. But at the moment we're sort of like, there's a big gap and we're trying to like plug the gap. And I think that's probably the hardest phase to be in.
I agree. It's like, I've done a little bit of mental health first aid training because I wanted to start recognizing between like my friends and just people like having a business. Like when I eventually employ people, like I want to be able to recognize that. But I didn't have any of that when I was at uni. And it's like, could I have recognized that my friend was going through that or not? They're all the things that I guess like people around that, like the survivors of that, like people around, like the friendship groups, always being like, why was I not able to know? But when I was at school, none of this education was available. And like the peer-to-peer support is really something that it was there. Like you're just like, oh, there's my best mates. But realistically now it's like people like your mates are you, like, I'm very lucky that I've got a group of mates that are like, if one of us is feeling shit, or there's one little thing that we're like, oh, I've not heard from him for 2 days, there's like always questions. It's like, drop him a message, how you doing? But like some people don't have that. And that's when you have that kind of like, I'd have loved to have known what Bob was going through with those final. Did he feel like he didn't have anybody to talk to, or did he have like just before that moment, did he have like a sense of like relief, like pressure, like nothing affected him anymore for that moment? And it's quite interesting. There's a Frank Turner, the musician. He's got a song called Wave Across the Bay, which is about Scott Hutchinson, who died by suicide. He was the lead singer from Frightened Rabbit, and one of the like lines in that was like, before you went out to the ocean, it's like you must have felt a sense of like purpose and relief, like everything was like a weight off his shoulders. But it'd just be great if like people had that support to be like, I'll take that weight off your shoulders now, before it got to that point. So I think it's great that you're doing like the peer-to-peer at such a young age, because I feel like, in 20 years time, when they become parents, they're going to be so tuned in to their emotions.
Definitely. I mean, one, I suppose, like more difficult thing, that I've had to see. So I now work at LSE. It's like an incredibly international, institution in London. And I think when I then meet students who come from, loads of different countries, I'm talking mainly about, kind of China, Japan, India, Pakistan, just that idea that you can struggle with things is just not taught, and I don't know how far it is off being taught. I'm not generalizing everything, but definitely the students that I've met with, it's just that kind of that pressure that they carry to do their family proud, to get amazing grades, to get a job after. It's so fine me reassuring them, and sometimes I make suggestions, and sometimes they'll even just laugh and they'll just say, thank you so much for your suggestion, but that's just not going to fly, with my mum and dad. And so I think it is it's also just that different under kind of that cultural difference, the fact that we are even having this conversation today, it would just be in some places. And so I think it's also just sometimes reconciling that as well, that some people that's just not a conversation that they have at home. It's not, being vulnerable, being being open with your emotions is still a sign of weakness. And so it's not just trying to kind of grapple like the generational thing, it's also just what everyone's kind of going through, and realizing that we in some respects are quite advanced compared to other places, but it's just, I don't know how far we are off kind of really getting that in mainstream education for everyone. I would say in some places probably quite far off, which is really difficult as well, because when they come to countries like this, they see that you are allowed to kind of express yourself a little bit more, and then they really like living here, and then there's that thought of having to go back home and almost become a different version of themselves. So that's just one other interesting thing that I've observed, I guess, in the last 6 months.
Yeah, that is interesting, like cultural thing. Like, so my wife's half Filipino, and she's been born in the UK, and her mum's been here for a long time. But whenever we go back, it's almost like mental health isn't really a thing, because but everyone's so happy. They're so happy with what they've got, but they've also got like family is everything. Their support network is so big that if they are feeling a certain emotion, someone will be there and someone will recognize it straight away. So I feel like they're very good in that sense, because
Filipino culture especially is like that.
They're so buzzing, they're just happy with what they've got, so therefore there's like no mental health like in a way, like there's no social like pressures of like having to feel a certain like way and have anxiety, because they don't really have time to, like, they don't even get stressed about traffic, and you can sit in traffic for 3 hours and move like 100 meters, and they're like so chill about it. They're like, it's fine. But here, if you travel, like 5 miles and it takes you.
I
Be
still
fucking
do, but it's
livid.
like 7 minutes. I'm just like cursing somewhere.
Yeah.
What's going on?
So-
It's not that big a deal, but
There's so many like different cultures that being over here is like you've got to like there's so many conversations you can have, and they're like, well, no, that's not a thing back there. Like, so it's kind of navigating that, I guess, like within schools as well, where you've got such a mixed community of people. Educating the parents is probably the one thing we could focus on more than trying to do it in schools. But how do you like tell people that are like 30 plus that are like just a lot of my mates, if I'd said, right, I'm going to sit you down, we're going to learn about this, they'd be like, nope. That opens their emotions, but they wouldn't want to be educated on it. They're like, I'll ask if you're all right, but I'm not going to go do a mental health first aid course or whatever. So yeah, it's difficult with the education side.
it is difficult. And no, you're just saying that, you've really made me laugh, because I just think about my brothers, and sometimes like he'll tell me and my mum something that's like really upsetting that's happened to his friends, and we'll go, oh my God, is he okay? Have you asked him? He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, how do you not know? How are you not compelled to be like, call him, give him a text, and it's just I mean, again, I'm not kind of saying it's a totally gendered thing, but I think sometimes that urgency in guys, I guess, isn't there so much, or I think they wait for people to tell them stuff rather than like actively seek it out, which is maybe something that like me and my friends would do like a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we had a guest, my friend Deej, on the podcast. He was our first guest, wasn't he, Dan? He got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in September, and then he sadly passed away in Feb. And it was the day after I got to the Philippines, he got put into a hospice. And one of my mates, who also is like good mates with him, he managed to get to go see him. And for the whole time I was with Toby, for a week and a half, we never spoke about it. I dropped little hints, but nothing. And it was kind of like, I know if like anything happened with my missus, she would be on the phone to her friend like instantly. But I was like, it was 3 weeks after that I went to meet Toby whilst we're back in the UK and been like, are you okay?
Interesting.
Even though I dropped hints, but I just knew he wasn't ready to talk. And I knew he wasn't going to talk to me about it. So it's like, that kind of like delayed reaction of his emotions build up. So there's definitely a divide. Guys are rubbish, and me and Dan are trying to educate with a podcast as much as we can. But we know it works though. Like I was speaking to a guy recently, actually, Dan, whose messages in the past being like he stopped drinking. He's now running like silly miles every day. It's just like it's been the podcast was like such an eye opener for him, and it's basically changed his life. He's like he plays music. His music is better. His like writing music is better. His focus at work is better. And that's we've changed one person's life just from telling mine and Dan's stories, which is just so good.
That's amazing. Sorry,
No, go on.
No, honestly, you go.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I feel like we have another episode in us. I feel like we could just. There's lots of things that we can start digging into.
I would like to get on that if we did do it. Like, love to do another episode with you, Ellie, and get the Calzy Foundation involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what are your thoughts on that, Dan? Because it'd be really cool to kind of learn a lot more, dig more into details of what they're doing, what they're planning on doing. And it's also awareness for them to our audience that are probably their kind of like, I guess, target audience to a certain extent, people that they might have known.
Absolutely. They'd love to do that. Absolutely.
So we can discuss that. But apart from me though, like like you covered other notes that I jotted down anyway from when you were explaining your journey and everything. I think it was like really interesting. It resonated with me when Dan sent you over a while ago to be like, oh, I should get Ellie on, and reading your story and stuff. It resonated to me, so I was like, I'm sure our listeners will resonate with it as well.
Yeah, I feel like I want to go a little bit deeper on when you came back from Australia and did the questionnaire thingy, and then set up the group from there and had like actual physical discussion with because was it all females?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like I would like to know more about that. I have to go and bath a 12-day-old now, but yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. It's a very, very
It
small
just took me a
human.
second, then I was like, can't be a dog. I was
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like I'd like to talk more about that, and I think because I think there's a potential. Matt was talking, we've got a bakery near us that are just about to open a pizza place, and Matt was talking about potentially doing a meetup. At the moment we do one meetup a month, and it's run and coffee. And Matt was talking about doing potentially like not a non-exercise meet where people come and yeah, literally it's just a social. And one of the things that I sort of put up against it was like, how would people feel just coming to talk or just coming to socialize, knowing that there's kind of like a mental health thing attached to it. So I feel like, yeah, it would be really interesting, potentially another time to just get some more of your thoughts in terms of like opening people up, bringing people in, etc., etc. If that would be good with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Whenever. And just because it ties in, that was something that the Calzy Foundation also wanted to do recently. Was we came up with this thing called Pillar Pine. So it was like, obviously it's centered around alcohol, but it was that idea of you come to a pub, but on the tables are questions to kind of do a check-in. And so that's something that we are still kind of wanting to do some way, somehow. But we're all dotted across the UK, so it's just about finding the right location. But yeah, so that's something that we have also toyed with doing. So yeah, we could definitely kind of brainstorm about the best way to do that for sure.
Wicked. That's super interesting. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate
I'm
it.
really sorry again about the delay.
That's all
right. In the end. But yeah.
That's fine.
Perfect. We'll I guess we'll catch up off air.
All right. Well, have good evenings, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ellie.
See you later.